The autumn sun hung low over the Arizona desert, painting the red rocks in shades of copper and rust as Jake Callahan rode into Copper Creek. Dust devils danced across the main street, and the wind carried the metallic tang of the mines that gave the town its name. His horse, a tired bay mare he'd bought 3 towns back, picked her way carefully over the rutted road, her hooves clicking against scattered stones. Jake pulled his hat lower, shading eyes that had seen too much. At 32, he carried himself like a man twice that age, shoulders hunched beneath a worn duster coat that had traveled too many miles. The leather saddlebags held everything he owned, a change of clothes, a few tools, and a bottle he tried not to reach for until the sun went down. Copper Creek wasn't much to look at. A single main street stretched between weathered buildings. The Broken Wheel Saloon, Morrison's General Store, a small church with a crooked steeple, and the mine company office that loomed larger than the rest. Men in dust-covered clothes trudged past, their face etched with the permanent squint of those who worked beneath the earth. Women in calico dresses hurried between shops, baskets on their arms, children clinging to their skirts. Jake dismounted outside the mine office, his boots raising small clouds of red dust. Inside, a thin man with wire spectacles looked up from a ledger. "Help you?" "Looking for work," Jake said, his voice rough from disuse. The man's gaze traveled over Jake's calloused hands, the breadth of his shoulders. "Ever work a mine before?" "Some. We're hiring. $1.50 a day, 6 days a week. Dangerous work. Cave-ins happen. Men die." "When do I start?" The clerk's eyebrows rose at the lack of questions. Most men wanted to know about safety measures, shift lengths, housing. This one seemed eager to disappear into the darkness below ground. "Tomorrow, dawn. Report to Shaft 3. Name, Jake Callahan. Any kin we should notify if something happens." Jake's jaw tightened. In his mind, flames danced against a night sky, and he heard Tom's voice calling his name. "No kin." The clerk made a note. "Boarding house is 2 streets over. Elena Morales runs a clean place. Fair prices. Tell her Hutchins sent you." Jake found the boarding house easily enough. A 2-story adobe structure with a wooden porch that had seen better days. Dried chilies hung in ristras by the door. And somewhere inside, he could hear the sound of children laughing. He knocked, the sound sharp in the cooling evening air. The woman who answered couldn't have been more than 25, though her dark eyes held the weight of someone who'd shouldered responsibility too young. Her black hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and flour dusted the apron covering her blue work dress. She studied him with a directness that made him want to look away. "Mrs. Morales Hutchins at the mine office said you might have a room." "Miss Morales," she corrected, her accent soft but present, marking her as one of the many Mexican families who'd called this land home long before the Anglos arrived. "I have 1 room left, 50 cents a week, includes breakfast and supper. No drinking in the rooms, no fighting, no women visitors after dark." "That's fine." She stepped aside to let him enter. The house smelled of beans and cornbread, of lye soap and the faint sweetness of dried herbs. 2 children, a boy about 12 and a girl maybe 8, peered at him from a doorway before their sister's sharp look sent them scurrying. "Miguel, Rosa, finish your studies." Elena called after them. She turned back to Jake. "This way." She led him up narrow stairs to a small room at the back of the house. It held a bed with an iron frame, a washstand, a small table with an oil lamp, and hooks on the wall for clothes. The window overlooked the desert, where saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the darkening sky. "Breakfast is at 5, supper at 6. Miss it and you go hungry. Washing day is Sunday. You can use the pump out back for water." She paused at the door, those keen eyes studying him again. "Running from the law?" "No, ma'am." "Running from something else, then?" It wasn't a question. Most men who come to Copper Creek are. Just keep your troubles to yourself and we'll get along fine. After she left, Jake sat on the edge of the bed and let his head fall into his hands. The room was clean, sparse, perfect for a man who wanted to disappear. Through the thin walls, he could hear the sounds of domesticity. Elena's voice directing the children, the clatter of dishes, a door closing. Normal sounds, family sounds, the kind he'd never hear again because of what he'd done. He pulled the bottle from his saddlebag but didn't open it. Not yet. First, he needed to unpack what little he had, make it look like he planned to stay. The truth was, he didn't plan anything anymore. He just moved from place to place, trying to outrun the flames that followed him in dreams. That first night in Copper Creek, Jake lay awake listening to the foreign sounds of his new surroundings. Coyotes howled in the distance, and the wind made the house creak like a ship at sea. Sometime near midnight, he heard footsteps in the hall, Elena checking on the children, her tread soft but purposeful. A protector, like Tom had been, like Jake should have been. The memory crashed over him like a flash flood in the desert. Tom's face, laughing at something Jake had said over dinner. The barn, filled with sweet hay and the promise of a good harvest. The lantern, knocked over in Jake's drunken stumbling. The way the flames had spread so fast, too fast, eating through dry timber like a living thing. Tom running in to save the horses, the beam falling. Jake too drunk to do anything but watch and scream his brother's name into the inferno. He pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars, trying to push the images back into the locked box in his mind. But they always escaped at night, when his defenses were down and the darkness reminded him of the mine shafts he sought out, places where the sun couldn't reach, where he could pretend he belonged in the shadows. Downstairs, he heard Elena moving about, probably preparing for the morning's breakfast. Did she ever sleep? He'd noticed the ledger on the hall table, columns of figures in neat handwriting, the careful accounting of someone making every penny stretch, the weight of raising siblings alone, of keeping a roof overhead and food on the table. She was young for such burdens. But then again, tragedy aged people fast out here in the territories. Jake finally dozed near dawn, only to wake to the sound of a bell tolling somewhere in town. Time for the miner's shift. He dressed in the darkness, splashed water on his face from the basin, and made his way downstairs. Elena was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. She looked up as he entered, and something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, that he was actually heading to work instead of sleeping off a drunk like some of her boarders. "Coffee's hot," she said, nodding toward the pot on the stove. "Biscuits and gravy on the table." He ate quickly, aware of her moving about the kitchen, efficient and purposeful. Miguel appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and she handed him a bucket. "Water from the pump, then help Rosa with the eggs." The boy glanced at Jake curiously, but did as told. Through the window, Jake could see other miners heading toward the shafts, lunch pails in hand, faces already set for the long day underground. He pushed back from the table, left his payment beside the plate, and headed for the door. "Mr. Callahan." He turned. Elena stood by the stove, arms crossed, that direct gaze fixed on him again. "You cried out in your sleep last night. These walls are thin." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Whatever you're running from, I hope you find peace. But don't bring trouble to my house." Jake's throat tightened. He managed a nod and escaped into the pre-dawn darkness, where he could pretend the moisture in his eyes was from the cold morning air, and not from the unexpected kindness of a stranger who had her own ghosts to battle. The walk to Shaft 3 took him past the cemetery on the hill, where wooden crosses tilted at drunken angles and the occasional stone marker spoke of families with enough money for permanent remembrance. How many miners lay there? How many brothers, fathers, sons? The desert took its toll in many ways. Cave-ins, accidents, disputes that ended with gunfire, or simply the slow wearing away of body and spirit under the relentless sun. At the mine entrance, he collected his equipment: pickaxe, shovel, helmet with its small lamp. The foreman, a grizzled Welshman named Davies, looked him over and grunted approval. "You'll work with Martinez's crew. Don't do anything stupid and you might survive the week." Jake descended into the earth, and for the first time in months, felt something like relief. Down here in the darkness, with the weight of rock above and the constant tap of picks on stone, he could lose himself in the simple rhythm of labor. No past, no future, just the swing of the pick and the ache in his muscles. It was as close to peace as a damn man could hope to find. The weeks passed in a blur of darkness and dust. Jake fell into the rhythm of Copper Creek up before dawn. 12 hours in the mine, supper at Elena's table, then retreat to his room where he'd sit by the window watching the desert stars until exhaustion finally claimed him. He spoke little, kept to himself, and earned a reputation among the miners as a steady worker who didn't cause trouble but wouldn't join them for drinks at the Broken Wheel either. It was on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after his arrival, that Jake found the small bundle outside his door, a cloth napkin wrapped around 2 fresh biscuits, still warm, and a slip of paper tucked inside. The handwriting was careful, precise. No burden is too heavy when shared. E.M. He stood in the hallway, staring at the note longer than he should have. Below, he could hear Elena getting Miguel and Rosa ready for school. The town had a one-room schoolhouse run by a spinster from Connecticut who'd come west for her health. Their voices drifted up through the floorboards. Rosa complaining about arithmetic, Miguel teasing her. Elena's firm voice cutting through with reminders about lunch pails and slate boards. Jake tucked the note into his shirt pocket and headed to work. But throughout the long day underground, he felt its presence like a small, warm stone against his chest. That evening, instead of disappearing to his room after supper, he lingered in the kitchen doorway. Elena was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up, wisps of dark hair escaping from her bun. Rosa dried while Miguel swept the floor with concentrated determination. "Need help," the words came out rough, unused. Elena glanced over her shoulder, surprise flickering across her face. The wood box could use filling. It was such a simple thing, carrying armloads of split wood from the pile outside to the box by the stove, but it felt like crossing a bridge he'd burned behind him months ago. Miguel joined him on the 3rd trip, chattering about school, about the mine superintendent's son who thought he was better than the Mexican kids, about the lizard he'd caught and wanted to keep as a pet. "Elena says no," the boy confided. "Says we got enough mouths to feed." "Your sister's a smart woman. She's okay, I guess, for a sister." Miguel studied Jake sideways. "You got family, Mr. Callahan." Jake's hand stilled on the wood. "Not anymore?" Something in his voice must have warned the boy off further questions. They finished filling the wood box in silence, but it was a companionable quiet, not the sharp-edged isolation Jake had wrapped around himself. December brought the first real storm of winter. The temperature plummeted, and snow, rare in this part of Arizona, began falling as Jake's shift ended. By the time he reached the boarding house, the wind was howling like a wounded animal, driving ice crystals against his face. Inside, he found chaos. The other boarders, 2 miners and a traveling surveyor, huddled in the main room while Elena struggled to hang blankets over the windows. The ancient shutters were banging loose, and cold air poured through the gaps. Without thinking, Jake took the hammer from her hands. "I'll fix them. Miguel, get me some nails from the toolbox in the pantry." For the next hour, he worked alongside Elena and the children, securing shutters, stuffing rags in cracks, building up the fire in the main fireplace. The other boarders pitched in too, and soon the house felt less like it might blow away and more like a fortress against the storm. When the worst was secured, Elena made coffee and brought out a pot of pozole she'd been saving for Sunday. They all gathered around the fire, the two miners telling tall tales, the surveyor sharing stories of the territories he'd mapped. Rosa curled against her sister's side, Miguel's eyes bright with excitement at being included with the adults. "Your turn, Callahan," one of the miners said. "Must have some stories. Quiet as you are." Jake stared into the fire, seeing other flames. Another night. The room fell silent except for the storm's fury outside. Finally, haltingly, he began to speak. "Had a brother once, Tom, 3 years older. Steady as bedrock." His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the storm's enforced intimacy, everyone heard. "We had a small ranch up in Colorado, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Built the barn ourselves, every beam and board." He paused, aware of Elena's steady gaze, of the children listening with the intensity young ones brought to adult confessions. I drank too much. Tom, he tried to help, tried to get me to stop, said I was wasting my life." Jake's hands clenched and unclenched. "One night, I came home drunk again, knocked over a lantern in the barn. The hay caught first, then the walls, went up like it was soaked in kerosene." Rosa made a small sound of distress. Elena's hand found the girl's shoulder. "Tom ran in to get the horses out." Jake's voice broke. "Beam came down. I tried to get to him, but the heat, the smoke, I was too drunk to do anything but watch him die." The silence stretched, broken only by the wind's howl and the crack of logs in the fire. Jake waited for the condemnation, the disgust, the turned backs. Instead, Elena spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "You loved him. More than anything." "And he knew that? Even at the end, he knew." She shifted Rosa to the surveyor's care and moved to sit beside Jake. Not touching, just close enough that he could feel her warmth. "The love remains, Mr. Callahan. The guilt, that's yours to carry or set down. But the love your brother had for you, that you had for him, fire can't burn that away." Jake felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the wall he'd built around his heart. Tears he'd held back for months threatened to spill over. He pushed to his feet, mumbling something about checking the horses, and escaped into the storm. But he only made it to the porch before his knees buckled. He sat on the top step, snow swirling around him, and let the tears come. They froze on his cheeks almost instantly. But he didn't care. Somewhere behind those flames that haunted him, he could almost see Tom's face, not twisted in agony, but wearing that patient smile he'd always had when Jake stumbled home. The door opened behind him. A blanket settled around his shoulders, and Elena sat beside him, her own shawl pulled tight. "You'll catch your death," he managed. "So will you." She was quiet for a moment, watching the snow. "My parents died of fever 2 years ago, both within a week of each other. I was supposed to marry Carlos Mendoza, have babies, keep his house instead. I'm raising my siblings and running a boarding house, wondering every day if I'm doing right by them." "You are." "How can you know?" Jake turned to look at her, really look at her. Snow caught in her dark hair, and her eyes reflected the lamplight from inside. "Because they smile, because they go to school with full bellies and clean clothes, because when they look at you, there's no fear there, just love. Some days I feel like I'm drowning. But you keep swimming anyway. That's courage." She smiled then, sad but real. "Is that what we're doing, swimming?" "Trying to." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who understood loss, watching the desert transform under its rare blanket of white. Finally, Elena stood, extending her hand. "Come inside before we both freeze. I have books in my room, poetry, some novels. You're welcome to borrow them. Sometimes words help when our own fail us." Jake took her hand, letting her pull him to his feet. Her grip was calloused from work, but gentle too. "I'd like that." Over the following weeks, a new pattern emerged. Jake would find books outside his door. Whitman, Longfellow, even a battered copy of Don Quixote in Spanish that he struggled through with Miguel's laughing help. In return, he began helping around the house without being asked. A loose floorboard fixed here, a shelf repaired there. His hands, which had only known destruction for so long, remembered how to build, to create. He started teaching Miguel basic carpentry in the evenings, showing him how to measure twice and cut once, how to feel the grain of wood and work with it rather than against it. Rosa would watch from her perch on a stool, offering commentary and occasionally being allowed to sand a smooth piece of pine until it felt like silk. "You're good with them," Elena said. One evening, finding him helping Rosa with her letters at the kitchen table. "They're good kids." "That's not what I meant." She set down her mending, studying him. "You have patience, gentleness. Not all men do." Jake felt a heat rise in his face. "I'm not—" "I know what you're not," she interrupted. "I'm talking about what you are." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him with Rosa's expectant face and a slate covered in carefully formed letters. But her words stayed with him through the evening and into the night, whispering possibilities he'd thought were burned away with that barn. Christmas was approaching, and Copper Creek began to show signs of festivity despite the hard times. Paper angels appeared in shop windows, and someone had strung lanterns across Main Street. Jake found himself whittling in the evenings, a horse for Miguel, a doll for Rosa. His hands remembered this too, the satisfaction of shaping something beautiful from raw wood. One night, Elena found him on the porch, adding final touches to the doll's face by lamplight. "She'll love it," Elena said, settling beside him with 2 cups of coffee. "It's not much." "It's everything. You've given them something beyond gifts. Mr. Callahan, you've shown them that broken things can be mended, that people can change." "Have I changed?" The question came out before he could stop it. Elena was quiet for a long moment, considering. The man who rode into town wouldn't have asked that question. He knew exactly what he was. All darkness, no light, now. She turned to face him fully. "Now I see someone fighting to find his way back. What if I can't? What if the darkness is all that's left? Then I'll light a candle and wait." The words were soft but certain. "Everyone deserves someone who refuses to give up on them." Jake's hands stilled on the wooden doll. In the lamplight, Elena's face held a mixture of determination and something else. Something that made his heart pound like he'd run all the way from the mine. "Why?" he whispered. "Because I see who you're trying to become. Because my heart has decided, against all sense, that you're worth the wait." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "When you're ready to believe that too, you know where to find me." She left him there with the half-finished doll and a heart so full of conflicting emotions he thought it might burst. Hope, fear, and longing, and underneath it all, a tiny flame of possibility that maybe, just maybe, he could become the man she seemed to see in him. Christmas Eve arrived with a dusting of frost that made the desert sparkle like scattered diamonds. The town had transformed itself with whatever decorations folks could manage. Paper stars in windows, pine boughs brought down from the distant mountains, candles flickering behind glass. The church bell rang out across Copper Creek, calling people to the evening service. Jake stood before the cracked mirror in his room, struggling with a collar he hadn't worn since Colorado. The white shirt was new, bought from Morrison's with wages he'd carefully saved. His hands trembled as he fastened the buttons. Not from drink. He hadn't touched the bottle in weeks, but from the knowledge of what he planned to do tonight. Downstairs, he could hear the rustle of preparation. Elena had closed the boarding house to guests for the evening, giving the other boarders coin to find meals at the hotel. Tonight was for family, she'd declared, and somehow that had come to include him. Miguel burst into his room without knocking, eyes bright with excitement. "Elena says to hurry, we'll be late for the dance." "Dance?" Jake turned from the mirror. After church service, the whole town goes. Elena made a new dress and everything. Rosa says she looks like a princess, but I think she just looks like Elena, except fancier." Despite his nerves, Jake smiled. He'd finished the boy's carved horse and Rosa's doll, wrapped them in brown paper and hidden them in the pantry. But there was another gift, one that had kept him awake these past nights, carved from a piece of mesquite wood he'd found on his walks. It sat in his pocket now, small and heavy as a stone. The church was packed when they arrived, families crowding into pews, miners scrubbed clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Jake found himself seated between Miguel and Elena, acutely aware of her presence. She did look beautiful, her black hair pinned up with small silver combs, wearing a deep blue dress that brought out the warmth in her skin. But it was the peace in her face that struck him most, the way she held Rosa's hand and gently corrected Miguel's fidgeting with practiced ease. The service washed over Jake in waves of memory. How long since he'd sat in a church Tom's funeral had been the last time, and he'd been too drunk to remember much beyond the weight of judgment in everyone's eyes. But here, now, with candles casting golden light and voices raised in silent night, he felt something ease in his chest. After the service, the congregation moved to the town hall, transformed for the occasion with lanterns and evergreen garlands. Tables groaned under the weight of shared food: tamales, roasted meats, pies, cookies shaped like stars. The miners' band had set up in one corner, tuning fiddles and guitars. Jake helped Elena get the children settled with plates of food, then found himself standing awkwardly as couples began to fill the dance floor. He watched Elena across the room, talking with the schoolteacher, her face animated in the lantern light. The gift in his pocket seemed to burn. "You planning to stand there all night, or are you going to ask her?" Jake turned to find Davies, the mine foreman, grinning at him. The older man had cleaned up well, his usually dusty beard neatly trimmed. Boy, I've been watching you moon over that woman for weeks. Life's too short and too hard out here to waste chances. Trust me on that." Davies nodded toward where his own wife sat with their grown daughters. 25 years we've been married. Nearly let her slip away because I was too scared to speak up. Don't be a fool like I almost was." The band struck up a waltz, and Jake made his decision. He crossed the room, his boots sounding too loud on the wooden floor. Elena looked up as he approached, and something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, hope, maybe a touch of fear that matched his own. "Would you?" He cleared his throat, extended his hand. "Would you dance with me, Miss Morales?" She placed her hand in his without hesitation. "I thought you'd never ask." They moved on to the floor, and Jake was grateful for the lessons his mother had insisted on years ago, back when the world made sense. Elena fit perfectly in his arms, her hand small but strong in his, the scent of lavender water subtle and sweet. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let 'em." They danced in silence for a moment, finding their rhythm. Around them, other couples swirled, the baker and his wife, young miners with girls from town, even Miguel attempting to lead Rosa in an approximation of the steps. "You look beautiful tonight," Jake said, then immediately felt foolish. "I mean, you always look—" "Thank you." Her smile was gentle. "You clean up well yourself, Mr. Callahan." "Jake, please, I think we're past formalities." "Jake!" She tested the name, and he felt it resonate in his chest. "You've been different these past weeks. Lighter, somehow." "I've had reason to be—" They turned with the music, and Jake caught sight of their reflection in the dark windows. A man and woman who looked like they belonged together, like this was natural and right. The sight emboldened him. "Elena, I need to tell you something." She looked up at him. "Waiting." The music continued, but Jake stopped dancing, standing still in the middle of the floor while other couples float around them like water around stones. I came here to disappear, to work until the darkness took me, until I could join Tom and pay for what I'd done. His voice was rough, urgent. But you and the children, you made me want to live again, made me remember there's good in the world worth fighting for. Jake! I loved no one before you. The words tumbled out, the ones he'd practiced and polished in his mind. I'll love no one after. And my fire, what's left of it, what you've helped rebuild, it burns only for you. Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, but she was smiling, her hand coming up to touch his face. Oh, you beautiful, broken man. I'm not whole, he warned. May never be. The darkness still comes. The dreams. I know. Her thumb traced his cheekbone, gentle as a butterfly. But you're trying. You're fighting. That's all anyone can ask. Is it enough? Instead of answering with words, Elena rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, a question and answer all at once, and Jake felt the last walls around his heart crumble. When they parted, he was dimly aware of whispers around them, of Miguel's whoop of delight, of Rosa clapping her hands. The gift, he said, fumbling in his pocket. I made you something. He pulled out the small carved heart, mesquite wood polished until it gleamed. On one side, he'd carefully etched their initials intertwined. On the other, a small flame. It's beautiful, Elena breathed, cradling it in her palm. It's a promise that my heart is yours, if you'll have it. That the fire between us is the kind that warms, not destroys. I'll have it, she said simply, and you'll have mine. We'll guard each other's flames. They danced again then, oblivious to the crowd, to the whispers and smiles and few disapproving glances. Jake held her close, marveling at how right it felt, how the broken pieces of himself seemed to fit together better with her in his arms. Later, walking home through the cold night with the children running ahead, Jake felt a presence beside him that wasn't Elena. For just a moment, he could have sworn he heard Tom's laugh on the wind, felt his brother's approval like a benediction. The guilt would always be there, a scar on his soul. But tonight, it didn't define him. Tonight, he was a man in love, walking a woman home under stars that seemed to shine with possibility. At the boarding house door, Elena paused. Stay for coffee. The children will want their presents. And I don't want this night to end yet. Neither do I. Inside, they watched Miguel and Rosa tear into their gifts with delighted exclamations. Eliana brought out packages too, a new shirt for Jake she'd sewn herself, books she'd ordered from back east. They sat by the fire as the children played, Elena tucked against Jake's side, his arm around her shoulders. This is what I dreamed of, she said quietly. When my parents died, when I was so scared and alone, I dreamed of this, a home, family, someone to share the burden and the joy. I don't deserve this, Jake said, the old doubt creeping in. Elena sat up, facing him with fierce determination. Stop. You don't get to decide what you deserve. That's for me to judge. And I say you deserve love, happiness, a chance to build something new from the ashes. The town won't all approve. A Mexican woman and an Anglo man. Since when do I care what the town thinks? I've been fighting their whispers since I took over this house. She touched the carved heart at her throat. Besides, we're not the first, won't be the last. Love doesn't follow the rules people try to make for it. Jake pulled her close again, breathed in the scent of her hair. When you lost in darkness, I'll light the candles, he quoted, remembering one of the poems she'd lent him. And when I'm drowning, you'll teach me to swim, she finished. We'll save each other. Jake Callahan, that's what love does. The clock struck midnight, Christmas Day arriving with its promise of new beginnings. Outside, snow began to fall again, rare and beautiful in the desert. Inside, the fire crackled, The children played, and two wounded souls found healing in each other's arms. It wasn't perfect. Jake knew the nightmares would still come. The guilt would still gnaw. The path ahead would have its stones. But for the first time since that terrible night in Colorado, he believed in tomorrow. "Merry Christmas, Elena," he whispered against her hair. "Merry Christmas, my love," she whispered back. And in those words, Jake heard the echo of grace, of sins forgiven, of life beginning again. Spring came early to Copper Creek that year, painting the desert in unexpected colors. Brittle bush bloomed yellow against the red rocks, and the saguaros crowned themselves with white flowers. Jake had left the mine in February, using his saved wages to rent a small workshop at the edge of town. The transition hadn't been easy. The other miners thought him foolish to give up steady pay, and more than one merchant looked skeptical when he came seeking credit for tools and lumber. But Jake's hands had remembered their old skill. The first piece he sold was a rocking chair, commissioned by the banker's wife. Word spread slowly, the way it did in small towns, carried on whispers and glances. The Mexican carpenter's Anglo man. Some called him, not always kindly, but when ranchers needed furniture that would last, when young couples setting up house wanted something more than rough-hewn basics, they came to Jake's shop. He'd built a small cabin behind the workshop, just 2 rooms and a porch, but it was his. Some evenings, Elena and the children would visit, bringing supper in covered baskets. They'd eat at the table Jake had made, solid oak that would last generations, while Miguel peppered him with questions about joints and grains and finishes. Rosa had claimed a corner of the workshop for herself, where she practiced letters on scraps of wood, the chalk dust mixing with sawdust. "You're building a life," Elena said one evening, running her hand along a half-finished cradle ordered by the schoolteacher's daughter. "Not just furniture, a real life." Jake set down his plane, wiped his hands on his apron. Through the open door, they could see Miguel teaching Rosa to whistle, their silhouettes dark against the sunset. "Sometimes I can't believe it's real. Keep thinking I'll wake up and be back in that room, drowning in whiskey and regret." "But you don't drink anymore." "No." He moved to stand beside her, their shoulders touching. "Hard to need whiskey when I have better reasons to get through the day." It had been 3 months since Christmas. 3 months of careful courtship under the watchful eyes of the town. They'd faced their share of cold shoulders misses. Morrison at the general store, who suddenly couldn't find Elena's usual order. The mine superintendent's wife, who crossed the street rather than acknowledge them. But there had been unexpected allies, too. Davies and his wife, who invited them for Sunday dinner. The priest who spoke pointedly about love knowing no boundaries during his sermons. "I've been thinking," Jake said, his voice careful. "The house is getting crowded? Rosa's too old to keep sharing with Elena, and Miguel needs his own space." Elena turned to look at him, eyebrow raised. "Is that so?" "And this cabin? Well, it's got 2 rooms. Could build on more? Make it a proper home?" He took a breath, pulled out the small box he'd been carrying for a week. "If you'd have me, if you'd marry me." Inside the box lay a ring. Simple silver set with a small turquoise stone he'd traded for with a Navajo craftsman. It wasn't fancy, nothing like what the banker's wife wore, but the stone was the color of the desert sky, and he'd made the setting himself. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "Jake Callahan, are you proposing while covered in sawdust?" "I am." "Seems fitting, doesn't it? This is who I am now, a carpenter who works with his hands, who comes home dusty and tired but happy." He took the ring from the box, held it up so it caught the dying light. "I can't give you wealth or an easy life, but I can give you my hands to build our home, my heart that beats only for you, and my promise to face whatever comes together." "Yes," the word came out as half laugh, half sob. "Of course, yes." His hands shook as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. They kissed in the doorway of the workshop, sawdust motes dancing in the golden light, while Miguel made exaggerated gagging noises and Rosa clapped with delight. They married in May, when the Palo Verde trees wore clouds of yellow blooms. It was a small ceremony. Elena in a dress of cream cotton trimmed with her mother's lace, Jake in his one good suit, Miguel and Rosa standing as witnesses. The priest spoke words in Spanish and English, binding two cultures as surely as two hearts. Not everyone in Copper Creek approved, but those who mattered were there. Davies and his family, the schoolteacher, a handful of miners who'd come to respect Jake's quiet strength, and Elena's friends from the Mexican community who had watched her struggle alone and were glad to see her find happiness. The reception was in their own yard, tables made by Jake's hands groaning under the weight of food from both traditions. Someone brought guitars, and music filled the desert evening. Jake watched Elena dance with her siblings, her face alight with joy, and felt Tom's presence like a blessing on the wind. "You did good, hermano," Miguel said, coming to stand beside him. The boy had shot up in recent months, his voice beginning to crack. "Elena hasn't smiled like this since before Mama died." "She saved me first." Jake said, "I'm just returning the favor." "Maybe you saved each other." Miguel's young face was serious. "That's what Father Francisco says about marriage, two people holding each other up when the storms come." Summer arrived with its furnace heat, but the cabin stayed surprisingly cool, built with the knowledge of desert dwellers. Jake had added the promised rooms, one for Miguel, one for Rosa, and a kitchen where Elena could work without the oppressive heat of the boarding house's massive stove. She still ran the boarding house, but now it was Jake who helped with the heavy work, who fixed what broke, who handled difficult guests with quiet authority. The nightmares still came sometimes. Jake would wake, sweat-soaked and gasping, Tom's name on his lips. But now Elena was there, her cool hands on his face, her voice calling him back from the flames. "I'm here," she would whisper. "You're safe. We're all safe." One particularly bad night, after a miner's funeral had brought back too many memories, Jake found himself on the porch at 3 a.m, staring at the stars. Elena joined him, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm night. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not about that night. Tell me about Tom living." So Jake talked until dawn, sharing memories he'd locked away with the painful ones. Tom teaching him to ride, to read the weather in cloud formations. Tom's terrible singing voice and his gift for making anyone laugh. The way he could calm a spooked horse with just his presence. By the time the sun painted the mountains pink, Jake felt lighter, as if sharing the good memories had finally balanced the weight of the bad. "He would have liked you," Jake said finally. "I would have liked him too, and I think—" Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think he would be glad you found your way back to life." That's what love wants for those it leaves behind. Not endless mourning, but the courage to continue. The workshop prospered through the summer. Orders came from as far away as Tucson, and Jake took on an apprentice, a young Apache man named Samuel, who had an artist's eye for wood grain. The boy had faced his own share of suspicious looks, but Jake remembered what it was like to need a second chance. "Why did you hire him?" one of the ranchers asked, collecting a commissioned desk. "Plenty of white boys need work." Jake ran his hand along the desk's surface, smooth as silk. "See this joint work, the inlay that Samuel's doing. I hired the best hands for the job. That's all that matters in my shop." The rancher left, grumbling, but he also left with the desk and would be back for more. Quality spoke louder than prejudice in the end, at least when people needed something built to last. Fall arrived with its blessed cooling, and with it came news that would test their hard-won peace. Elena's monthly bleeding hadn't come, and the town doctor confirmed what her body had already whispered. She was with child. Jake received the news with a mixture of pure joy and stabbing fear. A father, him, who had destroyed so much, would be responsible for creating and protecting new life. That night, he held Elena as she slept. His hand splayed across her still flat belly and made promises to the tiny life growing there. "I'll do better," he whispered. "I'll be the man you both deserve. I swear it on Tom's memory." The fire in their bedroom hearth burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. But these flames didn't frighten him anymore. They were contained, controlled, serving their purpose of warmth and light. Just as the fire in his heart, the love for Elena that had replaced the burning guilt, now served to illuminate their path forward rather than destroy what lay behind. Outside, a coyote called across the desert, and another answered. The sound that once seemed lonely now spoke of connection, of voices reaching across the darkness to say, "I am here. You are not alone. We survive together." Jake pressed a kiss to Elena's sleeping head and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was furniture to build, a nursery to prepare, a family to provide for. But tonight, in this room he'd built with his own hands, holding the woman who'd brought him back from the dead, carrying their child beneath her heart. Jake Callahan was exactly where he belonged. The boy who'd burned down his life had become a man who built things to last. And that, perhaps, was the greatest redemption of all. The rider appeared on the horizon just as November's chill settled over Copper Creek. Jake noticed him first from the workshop, a lone figure picking his way down the winding trail that led into town. Something about the set of the man's shoulders, the way he sat his horse, sent a prickle of unease down Jake's spine. He set down the chisel he'd been using and stepped onto the porch, shading his eyes against the late afternoon sun. The rider drew closer, and Jake's blood turned to ice. Harrison Garrison, Tom's old business partner from Colorado, a man who'd helped them establish the ranch, who'd eaten at their table countless times, a man who'd been away on a cattle drive the night of the fire and returned to find only ashes and grief. "Samuel," Jake called to his apprentice, his voice steady despite the roaring in his ears. "Head on home for the day." The young man looked up, surprised. It was barely 4 o'clock, but something in Jake's face must have warned him not to argue. He gathered his tools and slipped out the back, leaving Jake alone as Garrison dismounted in front of the workshop. 5 years had aged the man. His hair, once dark as coffee, now showed gray at the temples. Deep lines carved paths from his nose to his mouth, and his eyes held the hard glint of someone who'd ridden too many difficult trails. "Jake," the name came out flat, emotionless. "Took me a while to find you." "Harrison." Jake's hands hung at his sides, empty, defenseless. "How?" "Man can't hide forever. Heard talk in Tucson about a carpenter in Copper Creek doing fine work. Jake Callahan. They said, thought to myself, now what are the chances?" Garrison's eyes traveled over the workshop, the cabin beyond, lingering on the curtains Elena had hung in the windows. "Looks like you've done well for yourself. What do you want?" "Want?" Garrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I want Tom back. I want the ranch we built together back. I want to not have nightmares about finding his body in the ashes." His voice rose with each word. "But since I can't have any of that, I figured I'd settle for looking you in the eye and calling you what you are, a murderer." The word hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Jake didn't deny it, couldn't deny it. He'd called himself the same in the dark hours before dawn. "I was drunk," he said quietly. "It was an accident." "Accident." Garrison spat in the dust. "That what you tell yourself? That what helps you sleep in your nice bed with your nice wife while Tom rots in the ground?" The workshop door opened, and Elena stepped out. She must have heard the raised voices from the house. Her pregnancy showed now. 6 months of new life rounding her belly beneath her apron. She moved to Jake's side, her chin raised, dark eyes flashing. "You'll not speak to my husband that way on our property," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced down worse than angry men. Garrison's eyes narrowed. "Your husband, lady, do you know what he did? Do you know who you're sharing a bed with?" I know exactly who I married. Elena's hand found Jake's, her fingers intertwining with his. I know he made a terrible mistake that haunts him every day. I know he spent every moment since trying to be worthy of forgiveness. Forgiveness. Garrison took a step forward, and Jake moved slightly, putting himself between the man and Elena. There is no forgiveness for what he did. Tom trusted him, loved him, and he—
Stop!
Jake's voice was hoarse.
You're right. Every word you're saying is right. I killed my brother. Not on purpose. But that doesn't matter to Tom, does it? He's still gone.
He felt Elena's hand tighten in his, drawing strength from her touch. I can't undo it. God knows I've wished every day that it had been me in that barn instead. But I'm here, and he's not. And I have to live with that. Live with it. Garrison's face twisted. You're not just living with it. You're thriving. New business, new family. Like Tom never existed.
No.
Jake shook his head. Everything I build thinking of him. Every piece of furniture, every board I plane, I hear him telling me to measure twice, cut once. When I teach my apprentice, I use Tom's words. He's in everything I do, every choice I make to be better than I was. Pretty words don't bring back the dead. No, they don't. Jake released Elena's hand, stepped forward. If you want to hit me, do it. If you want to drag me into the street and tell everyone what I did, I won't stop you. But it won't bring Tom back. It won't rebuild the ranch. It'll just add more pain to what's already a river of it. Garrison's fists clenched and unclenched. For a moment, Jake thought he would swing, almost hoped he would. Physical pain might be easier to bear than this confrontation with his past-made flesh. Then Miguel appeared, running from the direction of town. Jake, Elena, the schoolteacher says— He skidded to a stop, taking in the scene, the tension thick as desert dust. Who's this? Someone from my past, Jake said quietly. Miguel, go inside. But the boy moved closer instead, some instinct making him protective. He'd grown in the past months, starting to show the man he'd become. You okay, Jake? The simple question, the obvious care in it, seemed to break something in Garrison. His shoulders sagged, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured bellows. Tom used to talk about you, he said, his voice different now, rougher. Said you were brilliant with wood, could make anything. Said you just needed to get the drinking under control and you'd be something special. He looked at the workshop again, seeing it properly this time. Guess he was right about that part. Harrison. I'm staying at the hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll be gone. Garrison moved to his horse, grabbed the reins. I won't make trouble for you. Not because you deserve peace, you don't. But because Tom wouldn't want me to destroy what you've built. He always saw the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. He mounted up, looked down at Jake one last time. You want forgiveness, you'll have to get it from him. I've got none to give. He rode away, leaving silence in his wake. Jake stood frozen until Elena's arms came around him from behind, her rounded belly pressing against his back. Come inside, she said softly. But Jake pulled away, stumbling to the porch steps, sinking down with his head in his hands. He's right. I don't deserve any of this. You, the children, this life. Stop! Elena lowered herself beside him. No easy task with her changed center of gravity. You don't get to do this. You don't get to let one man's pain undo all the healing you've done. But, no. Her voice was fierce now. That man is hurting. Yes, he lost his friend, his business partner, but you lost your brother. You've been punishing yourself for 5 years. When is it enough? Jake, when do you get to stop dying for one night's mistake? I killed him. Elena. The fire killed him. The accident killed him. Your drinking contributed. Yes, but you didn't set out to hurt anyone. She grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. I need you to hear me. Our child needs a father who can forgive himself, who can teach them that people can make terrible mistakes and still be worthy of love. Miguel and Rosa need the man who showed them that strength can be gentle. I need my husband whole, not broken by guilt that serves no one. What if I can't? What if he's right and I'm just fooling myself, playing at being a good man when underneath? Elena kissed him, hard and desperate. When she pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. You are a good man, not perfect, not without fault, but good. You think Tom would want this. You think he'd want you drowning in guilt forever. From inside the house? Rosa's voice called out, asking about supper, normal life, continuing despite the earthquake that had just shaken Jake's carefully rebuilt world. She's hungry, Elena said, wiping her eyes. Growing children need to eat. Life goes on. Jake, that's not betrayal, that's survival. She struggled to her feet, one hand on her back. Jake rose quickly to help her, and she leaned into him for a moment. I won't let you go, she whispered. No matter how hard you try to push me away. That's what love does. It holds on through the storms. They went inside together, Jake's arm around Elena's waist. Miguel peppered them with questions about the stranger, but Elena deflected them with the skill of someone used to managing difficult situations. They ate supper, beans and rice, tortillas warm from the griddle, the simple fare that had become Jake's salvation. Rosa chattered about school. Miguel talked about helping at the workshop. And slowly, Jake felt himself settling back into his skin. That night, unable to sleep, he sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen. By lamplight, he wrote a letter he'd never send. Tom, I met Harrison today. He hates me, and he should. I hate myself most days, though Elena's trying to cure me of that. I married Tom, a Mexican woman who runs a boarding house and has eyes that see right through me. We're having a baby. Can you imagine me? A father. I'm terrified I'll fail this child like I failed you. But I'm going to try. Going to be the man you always said I could be. I named my workshop after you, T&J Carpentry. Everyone thinks it's Jake, but it's you. Always you. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm trying to be better. Your brother, Jake. He folded the letter, went out to the porch, and burned it in an old tin can. The smoke rose into the star-filled sky, and Jake imagined it reaching wherever Tom was, carrying messages that words couldn't hold. Elena found him there an hour later, brought a blanket for his shoulders and her presence for his heart. They sat together, watching the desert night, not speaking because everything had already been said. In her belly, their child moved, and Jake placed his hand there, feeling the future pushing against his palm. Tomorrow, Harrison would leave. Tomorrow, Jake would go back to his workshop. Samuel would return. Orders would need filling. Tomorrow, life would continue its relentless forward motion. But tonight, he sat with his wife under stars that had witnessed every human sorrow and joy, and chose to believe that redemption wasn't just possible, but already happening. One breath, one heartbeat, one small act of love at a time. The days after Harrison's visit passed like storm clouds over the desert, dark, heavy, threatening to break. Jake threw himself into his work with desperate intensity, starting before dawn and working until his hands shook from exhaustion. Orders piled up completed, and Samuel watched with concern as his mentor drove himself harder than any man should. Elena watched too, her eyes following Jake as he picked at his supper, as he lay awake staring at the ceiling, as he flinched away from her touch. On the fourth night, she'd had enough. You're leaving, she said, not a question but a statement. She stood in the doorway of their bedroom, one hand braced against the frame, the other resting on her swollen belly. You're already half gone. Your body's here, but your mind is on the road. Jake looked up from where he sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, as if he might need to run at any moment. Elena. No. She moved into the room, slow and deliberate. You don't get to Elena me with that voice full of goodbye. You don't get to decide for both of us. You heard Harrison. I'm a killer. The whole town will know soon enough. Jake's voice was hollow. You deserve better. The baby deserves better. A father without blood on his hands. A name that doesn't carry shame. And Miguel and Rosa, what do they deserve? Elena's voice rose, sharp with pain and anger. To wake up and find another person they love has abandoned them. To learn that love is conditional. That it runs away when things get hard. That's exactly what it is. She sank onto the bed beside him, taking his face in her hands when he tried to turn away. Look at me, Jake Callahan, look at me. He met her eyes, saw the tears there, the determination, the fierce love that had saved him once and was trying to save him again. You think you're protecting us by leaving you're destroying us? Her thumbs traced his cheekbones, gentle despite her harsh words. This child I carry, your child, will grow up wondering why their father didn't love them enough to stay. I'll spend my life alone. Not because I had to, but because the man I chose decided I wasn't worth fighting for. It's not about worth. It's exactly about worth. You've decided you're not worthy of love, of forgiveness, of family. But that's not your choice alone. She pressed his palm against her belly, held it there when he tried to pull away. Feel that that's life, Jake. Life that exists because of us, because of love. You don't get to throw that away because one man couldn't forgive you. The baby moved under his hand, a flutter like bird wings. And Jake felt something crack inside his chest. I'm scared, he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep. I'm so scared I'll ruin this too, that I'll fail you, fail our child, like I failed Tom. Then be scared. Elena pulled him against her, cradling his head to her shoulder as sobs shook his body. Be scared and stay anyway. That's what courage is, not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. Jake wept then, truly wept. For the first time since Harrison's visit, he cried for Tom, for the ranch reduced to ashes, for the man he'd been and could never be again. But mostly he cried from relief, because Elena's arms didn't let go, didn't push him away, just held him steady while he fell apart. When the storm passed, they lay together on the bed, fully clothed. Jake's head on Elena's chest, listening to her heartbeat. I wrote a letter, he said into the gathering darkness. To you, to explain why I had to go. He pulled the folded paper from his shirt pocket, handed it to her. Elena took it, held it to the lamp, and read. When she finished, she very deliberately tore it into pieces, letting them fall like snow onto the floor. No more letters, she said. No more goodbyes. You want to honor Tom's memory, then live, Jake. Live fully, love deeply, be the man he believed you could be. What if the town will talk. They always do. Some will turn their backs, others will surprise us with grace. But this is our life, not theirs. She laced their fingers together. I need to tell you something. The day you arrived, I saw you from my window. Saw you tie up your horse, shoulders bent like you carried the world. And I thought, there's a man who knows about losing everything. Jake turned to look at her, surprised. I knew you were running from something terrible. The nightmare, the drinking you were trying to stop, the way you flinched from kindness. Elena smiled sadly. But I also saw how you were with Miguel and Rosa, patient, gentle, never raising your voice even when Miguel pestered you with questions. I saw you rebuilding yourself, piece by piece, choosing to create instead of destroy. You saved me. No, she shook her head. You saved yourself. I just refused to let you do it alone. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Jake tensed, but Elena squeezed his hand. Probably Mrs. Davies with that fabric she promised me. Stay here. But it wasn't Mrs. Davies! Jake heard Elena's surprised exclamation, then footsteps. And then she appeared in the doorway with an envelope in her hand, her face unreadable. It's from Harrison Garrison, she said. He left it at the hotel for you." Jake's hands trembled as he took the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in Harrison's blocky handwriting. "Jake, I've spent 3 days in this town, watching, listening. Saw you with your family, saw your workshop, talked to people who know you now. Davies at the mine says you're the most reliable man he knows. The priest speaks of your charity. Furniture donated to families who can't afford it. Teaching young men a trade. I hate that you've found peace. Hate that you've built something good from the ashes of what we lost. But Tom always saw the best in people, especially you. My brother's got good in him. He'd say, just needs the right reason to let it show. Seems you found your reason. I can't forgive you. That pain sits too deep, but I won't destroy what you've built. Tom wouldn't want that. Live well. It's what he would have wanted. H.G." Jake read it twice, then handed it to Elena. She read it, then carefully folded it and placed it on the dresser. "He's giving you permission," she said softly. "Permission to live. I don't need his permission." "No?" Elena smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "But it helps to have it anyway." Jake stood, pulling Elena up with him. "I need to ask you something. Will you forgive me?" "For what?" "For almost leaving. For being weak. For—" Elena stopped his words with a kiss. "There's nothing to forgive. You stayed. That's all that matters." From the kitchen came the sound of the front door opening. Miguel and Rosa returning from their evening chores. Their voices carried down the hall, normal and alive and present. "Elena, Jake, we're home." Home. The word settled into Jake's chest like a missing piece clicking into place. He looked at Elena, at her beloved face, at the swell of their child beneath her heart, and made a decision that felt like setting down a weight he'd carried too long. "Let's go have supper with our family," he said. They walked to the kitchen hand in hand, finding Miguel and Rosa already at the table, bickering good-naturedly about whose turn it was to say grace. The lamp cast warm light over the scene, ordinary and precious as breath. "Finally," Rosa exclaimed. "We're starving." "You're always starving," Miguel teased, then looked at Jake with concern. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." Jake felt Elena's hand squeeze his under the table. "I'm good," he said, surprised to find it was true. "Just working through some things, but I'm here. I'm staying." "Of course you're staying," Rosa said, as if the idea of anything else was absurd. "You live here. Plus, who would teach Miguel to make furniture? Elena can't do everything." The simple acceptance in her voice, the assumption that he belonged, nearly undid Jake again. But this time the emotion that rose in his throat wasn't grief or guilt, but gratitude so profound it left him momentarily speechless. They ate together, the four of them around the table Jake had built, in the house Jake had expanded. Living the life Jake had almost thrown away. Outside, the desert wind picked up, rattling the windows. But inside was warmth and light and the sound of family. Later, as they prepared for bed, Jake found the pieces of his goodbye letter on the floor. He gathered them carefully, took them to the kitchen stove, and fed them to the flames. This time, watching paper turn to ash didn't bring memories of destruction. Instead, he thought of the phoenix Rosa had read about in her mythology book, the bird that died in fire only to rise again, renewed. "Coming to bed," Elena called. "Coming," he answered, and meant it in all ways. Coming to bed, coming back to life, coming home to himself at last. That night, for the first time since Harrison's visit, Jake slept without dreams, and when he woke to the sound of roosters crowing and Elena's soft breathing beside him, he didn't think of leaving. He thought of staying, of building, of all the mornings yet to come. The past would always be there, a scar across his heart. But scars meant healing, meant survival, meant the story went on, and Jake Callahan, carpenter and husband and soon-to-be father, was finally ready to see how his story would unfold. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing wildflowers that carpeted the desert in purple and gold. Elena gave birth on a morning when the Palo Verde bloomed yellow as sunshine, her cries mixing with the sound of mourning doves outside the window. Jake paced the front room like a caged animal while the midwife and Mrs. Davies tended to his wife. Miguel and Rosa huddled on the sofa watching him with wide eyes. "You're going to wear a hole in the floor," Miguel said, trying for humor but his voice tight with worry. Jake barely heard him. Every sound from the bedroom sent fresh waves of terror through him. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her like he'd lost? A new sound cut through his spiral of fear. A baby's cry, strong and indignant. Jake's knees nearly buckled. Then Elena's voice, exhausted but triumphant, calling his name. "A son," the midwife announced, opening the door. "Healthy as a young bull. Now get in here before you fall over." Jake entered the room on unsteady legs. Elena lay propped against pillows, hair damp with sweat, face glowing with a light that made his chest tight. In her arms, wrapped in the blanket Rosa had helped stitch, was the smallest human Jake had ever seen. "Come meet your son," Elena said, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. Jake approached slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter this miracle. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, eyes squeezed shut, one tiny fist waving in the air. When Jake touched that miniature hand, the fingers wrapped around his with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Jake whispered, tears he didn't try to hide rolling down his cheeks. "What should we call him?" Elena studied their son's face, then looked up at Jake with gentle certainty. Thomas Miguel Callahan." Jake's breath caught. "Elena!" He should carry the name of good men, men who knew how to love, how to protect, how to build rather than destroy. She shifted the baby, placed him in Jake's arms. Men like his father. Holding his son for the first time, Jake felt something fundamental shift inside him. This tiny life, innocent and unmarked by the world's pain, was his to protect, to guide, to love. The weight of that responsibility should have terrified him. Instead, it anchored him more firmly to the earth than any guilt ever had. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "I'm your papa, and I promise you, I'll do better. I'll be better. For you." The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and small miracles. Jake learned the rhythm of warming bottles and changing cloths, the particular cry that meant hunger versus discomfort. He'd rise in the darkness to walk the floor with Thomas, singing half-remembered lullabies in a voice rough from disuse, marveling at how this small creature had reorganized the universe around his tiny presence. The workshop suffered those first months. Samuel picked up the slack without complaint, handling simpler orders while Jake stumbled through his days half asleep but wholly content. Some afternoons, Elena would bring Thomas to the shop, and Jake would work with his son sleeping in a cradle he'd built, the baby soothed by the rhythmic sound of playing on wood. "You're different," Samuel observed one afternoon, watching Jake carefully fit a dovetail joint. "Softer, somehow." "Fatherhood changes a man," Jake replied, testing the joint's fit. "Makes you think beyond yourself. My father said children are arrows we shoot into a future we'll never see." Samuel's voice carried the weight of his own losses, his family scattered by the government's policies. Maybe that's why we work so hard to aim them true. Jake considered this, thinking of all the ways he could fail his son, all the darkness he might accidentally pass on. But then Thomas stirred in his cradle, making the small sounds that preceded waking, and Jake felt that increasingly familiar surge of protective love. "Then we'd better make sure we're worthy bowmen," he said. The christening took place on a Sunday when the summer heat hadn't yet turned brutal. The church was fuller than Jake had expected, Davies and his family. Several miners Jake had worked alongside, Elena's friends from the Mexican community, even Morrison from the general store who'd recently commissioned a dining set. As Father Francisco spoke the words over Thomas, Jake felt the presence of witnesses both seen and unseen. "Tom would be proud," Elena whispered, her hand finding his. "Look what you've built from ashes." After the service, they held a gathering at their home. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Elena's tamales, Mrs., Davies's pies, contributions from neighbors who'd become friends. Jake found himself standing apart for a moment, watching the scene, Miguel teaching some younger boys to whittle, Rosa holding court with her school friends, Elena moving through the crowd with Thomas in her arms, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious warmth. "Never thought I'd see Jake Callahan hosting a party," a voice said beside him. Jake turned to find Dr. Holcomb, the town physician who delivered Thomas. The older man had a knowing look in his eyes. "Life takes strange turns," Jake said carefully. "Indeed it does. You know, when you first came to town, I wondered how long before I'd be treating you for drink poisoning or injuries." The doctor sipped his lemonade. "Instead, I'm here celebrating your son's christening. Remarkable how a man can change when he finds something worth changing for." "Or someone," Jake said, his eyes finding Elena again. "Or someone," the doctor agreed. "That woman of yours, she's got steel in her spine. Takes a special kind of strength to see past what a man was to what he could be." As if sensing their attention, Elena looked up, caught Jake's eye, smiled. In that moment, with his wife smiling at him and his son peaceful in her arms, Jake felt the last chain of his old life finally break. He wasn't the man who'd burned down a barn anymore. He was Thomas's father, Elena's husband, a carpenter and member of this community. The past informed him but no longer defined him. As spring turned to summer and summer to autumn, life settled into new patterns. Thomas grew with astonishing speed. His eyes, Elena's warm brown, taking in the world with serious consideration. His first smile nearly stopped Jake's heart. His first laugh, prompted by Rosa making faces, had the whole family gathering around his cradle. Jake expanded the workshop, taking on a second apprentice, a young Mexican man named Carlos, who had an artist's eye for detail. The three of them worked in companionable rhythm, filling orders that now came from as far as Phoenix. Jake had started incorporating small flame motifs into his pieces, not symbols of destruction, but of warmth, light, transformation. They became his signature, these small carved flames that spoke of resurrection rather than ruin. One evening in late October, Jake was closing the workshop when he noticed a figure sitting on the bench outside. The man was travel-worn, dust-covered, but something about his posture was familiar. As Jake approached, the stranger looked up, and Jake's heart stopped. The face was older, marked by sun and hardship, but the eyes were unmistakable. The same eyes Jake saw in his nightmares, the same eyes that had looked at him with trust before the flames took everything. "Tom," but even as the word left his lips, Jake knew it was impossible. Tom was dead. He'd seen the body, helped dig the grave. This was... "You look like you've seen a ghost," the man said, and the voice was wrong. Similar, but not the same. "Though I suppose I might be close enough. Name's Matthew Callahan. I believe you knew my brother." Jake's legs gave out. He sank onto the bench, staring at this apparition. Tom never mentioned a brother. Half-brother, different mothers. We weren't close. Matthew studied Jake with those painfully familiar eyes. "Took me years to track down what happened to him. Found the grave in Colorado, the record of the fire. Found out you'd survived, disappeared." Jake's throat closed. What could he say? How could he explain? "I know what happened," Matthew continued. "Talked to folks in the old town. Accident, drink, fire." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I'm not here for revenge, if that's what you're thinking. Too tired for that, too old. Just wanted to see the last person who saw Tom alive." "I killed him." The words came out raw, torn from the place Jake had thought was healed. Fire killed him. Accident killed him. Matthew's echo of Elena's words from so long ago made Jake's chest tight. You were just the poor fool who knocked over the lantern. They sat in silence as the sun set, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Finally, Matthew spoke again. Tell me about him, about how he lived, not how he died. So Jake talked. He told this stranger who wore Tom's face about his brother's laugh, his steady hands, his gift with horses, about winter evenings by the fire, Tom reading aloud from whatever book had caught his fancy, about the dreams they'd shared for the ranch, the future they'd planned. As he spoke, Jake realized he could finally think of Tom without the flames getting in the way. The memories were clear now, precious rather than painful. He sounds like he was a good man, Matthew said when Jake finally fell silent. The best? Then honor him by being the same. Matthew stood, stretched. I saw your family at the house. Your boys got Tom's chin. I think, or maybe I'm imagining it. You're welcome to stay. Jake offered. Meet them properly. Elena would... No. Matthew held up a hand. I've seen what I needed to see. You're living well, building something good. That's enough. He started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Jake, the fire might have been your fault, but Tom's death wasn't. He made his choice to run into that barn. Made it from love, trying to save what you'd built together. Don't dishonor that choice by drowning in guilt forever. He disappeared into the gathering darkness, leaving Jake alone with thoughts that felt cleaner somehow, as if Matthew's absolution had washed away the last of the poison. When Jake finally went home, he found his family gathered in the main room. Elena was reading to Rosa while Miguel did his schoolwork. Thomas lay on a blanket, practicing his new skill of rolling over, face scrunched in concentration. You're late, Elena said, but her smile was warm. Supper's keeping warm on the stove. Sorry, had a visitor at the shop. Jake picked up Thomas, who gurgled with delight. Tom's half-brother. Elena's eyes widened, but she waited until after the children were in bed to ask for details. Jake told her everything. Sitting on their bed with Thomas sleeping between them. It's like the universe wanted to give you one more chance to say goodbye, she said softly. Or to finally say hello to who I've become. Jake traced Thomas's perfect features with one finger. I think I'm ready now, to truly live, not just survive. Elena's kiss was answer enough. Later, as his family slept around him, Jake stood on the porch looking at the stars. Somewhere among them, he liked to think, Tom was watching and approving of this life built from the ashes of the old. I loved no one before her, Jake whispered to the night. I'll love no one after, and my fire burns only for them. Elena, Thomas, Miguel, Rosa, the family you helped me find by losing you. Rest easy. Brother, I've got it from here. A shooting star streaked across the sky, and Jake took it as a sign. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, orders to fill, children to raise, a life to continue building. But tonight, standing under the vast desert sky, Jake Callahan was exactly where he belonged, home, forgiven, and finally, truly free. The years flowed like water through desert sand, sometimes rushing, sometimes slow, always leaving their mark. Jake's hair showed silver at the temples now, earned through nights walking colicky babies and days bent over his workbench. Elena's face bore the lines of laughter and worry that came with raising children, but her eyes still held the same fire that had called him back from the darkness 25 years ago. They sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar shades of copper and gold. The rocking chairs Jake had made for their 5th anniversary creaked in companionable rhythm. From inside came the sound of grandchildren, Thomas's twins, born just last year, already showing their father's serious nature and their mother Mary's quick smile. Hard to believe it's been so long, Elena said. her hand finding his across the space between their chairs. "Some days it feels like yesterday I rode into town," Jake replied. "Other days, like that was a different man entirely." It was a different man. That one was all sharp edges and shadows. This one, she squeezed his hand. This one knows how to build things that last. The workshop had grown into a proper furniture company now, with Thomas gradually taking over the daily operations. He'd inherited Jake's eye for grain and Elena's head for business. Building on what his parents had started, Miguel had become a doctor, returning from schooling in San Francisco to serve Copper Creek and the surrounding communities. Rosa had married the schoolteacher's son and took over the one-room schoolhouse herself, filling young minds with knowledge and wonder. "Letter came today," Elena said, pulling an envelope from her apron pocket. "From Samuel." Jake's first apprentice had moved to California years ago, starting his own workshop, but they still corresponded regularly. The letter spoke of success, of a growing family, of gratitude for the chance Jake had given him when others saw only an Apache boy with no prospects. "He's doing well," Jake said, folding the letter carefully. "Better than I ever did at his age. You gave him what Tom gave you." Elena observed, "A chance to become who he was meant to be." Tom, even now. The name could catch Jake off guard, though the pain had long since transformed into something softer. Their son carried the name with honor, never burdened by its history, only blessed by its legacy. "Papa Abuela," a voice called from the house. Maria, Thomas's daughter, appeared in the doorway, flower in her dark hair. "We're making cookies. Mama says you have to come tell us the secret ingredient for your famous snickerdoodles." "The secret," Jake said, rising with the careful movements of a man whose body bore the marks of decades of physical work, "is to always make them with love." Maria rolled her eyes with the dramatic flair of a 6-year-old. "That's what you always say." "Because it's always true," Elena added, following them inside. The kitchen was chaos, but the good kind. Mary trying to manage the twins while Maria measured ingredients with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Thomas stood at the stove, looking so much like Jake at that age it sometimes took Elena's breath away. "Finally," Thomas said with a grin, "reinforcements. The natives are restless." They worked together, 3 generations in one kitchen, making cookies and memories. Jake showed Maria how to roll the dough just right while Elena helped Mary corral the twins. Thomas watched it all with the same quiet contentment Jake had learned to recognize in himself, the peace of a man who'd found his place in the world. Later, after the children were settled and the house had quieted, Jake found himself in his workshop, not the grand building where his employees crafted furniture for clients across the Southwest, but the small shed behind the house where he still liked to work with his hands when the mood struck. On his workbench sat his latest project, a memory box for Elena, to commemorate their silver anniversary. Each panel told a story in carved relief: their meeting at the boarding house door, their first dance, their wedding, the births of children and grandchildren. The lid bore an inscription in both English and Spanish: "I loved no one before you. I'll love no one after. My fire burns only for you." He was adding the final touches when Elena appeared, shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Still working?" "Almost done." He set down his tools, drew her close. "Do you remember what you told me that night during the storm, when I first spoke about Tom?" "That love doesn't burn away," Elena said softly. "That it remains even after everything else is ash. You were right, about all of it." Jake turned the box to show her the completed panels. "Every piece I've ever made has been a prayer of thanks for that truth." Elena traced the carved figures with gentle fingers, tears gathering in her eyes. "It's beautiful, like our life, all the pieces fitting together to make something whole." They stood together in the workshop where so much had been built. Not just furniture, but a life, a legacy, a love that had transformed destruction into creation. Through the window, They could see the lights of Copper Creek spread below them, the town that had welcomed a broken man and watched him rebuild himself board by board, day by day. "I have something for you too," Elena said, producing a leather-bound journal from beneath her shawl. "I've been writing our story, for the grandchildren and their children, so they'll know where they came from, what love can build from ashes." Jake opened it to the first page, saw Elena's careful script. "This is the story of how love saved 2 souls and built a family from the desert dust." "Read it to me," he asked. So they settled on the old bench where he'd once carved toys for Miguel and Rosa, where he'd wrestled with demons and chose hope. Elena's voice rose and fell in the familiar cadence of storytelling, painting their history in words as Jake had painted it in wood. As she read, Jake thought about the man who'd ridden into Copper Creek all those years ago, weighted down with guilt and searching for darkness to hide in. That man could never have imagined this. A workshop full of beauty, a home full of laughter, a heart full of love instead of ash. The story wound on, through struggles and triumphs, through babies born and children raised, through all the small moments that built a life worth living. When Elena reached the present, she closed the journal and looked at him. How should it end? Jake considered, looking at the woman who'd refused to let him disappear, who'd lit candles in his darkness and taught him to transform destruction into creation. "It doesn't end," he said finally. "It goes on, in Thomas and his children, in the furniture that will outlast us all, in the love that refuses to die no matter how hot the flames. The fire burns eternal, just like you taught me." Elena kissed him then, and it carried the weight of all their years together, the struggles and joys, the ordinary mornings and extraordinary graces. When they parted, both had tears on their cheeks, but they were the good kind, the kind that watered gratitude. They walked back to the house, hand in hand, an old carpenter and his wife, carrying between them a love story written in wood and whispered in darkness, strong enough to build a life on, bright enough to light the way home. Inside, their family slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams the blessed dream. And Jake Callahan, who had once sought to disappear into darkness, stood in the doorway of his home and gave thanks for the light in Elena's eyes, the light in his workshop, the light that had transformed his consuming guilt into creative fire. "My fire burns only for you," he whispered into the desert night, knowing that you had expanded to encompass not just Elena, but all of this family, community, the chance to build rather than destroy. Somewhere in the vast Arizona sky, a star fell, and Jake didn't need to make a wish. He had everything he'd never dared dream of and more. The boy who'd burned down his life had become a man who built things to last, and that transformation was the greatest gift of all. Their story would go on, carried in the grain of wood and the hearts of children, proof that love could resurrect even the most broken souls. And in a small workshop in Copper Creek, flames danced in carved relief on furniture that would outlast them all, no longer symbols of destruction, but of the eternal fire that burns between souls who refuse to let each other fall into darkness. The end was really just another beginning, and Jake Callahan, carpenter and husband, father and grandfather, survivor and thriver, was finally, fully, forever home. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through Jake and Elena's story. I hope their tale of redemption and enduring love has touched your hearts as much as it touched mine in the telling. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect across the miles, just as Jake and Elena connected across their differences. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about what resonated with you. Until next time, may your own fires burn bright with love and hope.